And welcome back in for another weekly, usually 9 a.m. on Wednesday, RedRecover.com Inside the Paint Show. Myra Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel here in Milwaukee in the exact same hotel room as a week ago, getting ready for Heat Bucks tonight, Game 5 from the Sun-Sentinel. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk, NBCSports.com, out in L.A., where they used to have 2 playoff teams. Now they have 1 playoff team. We'll get to that in a moment, but let's get to the moment at hand. And I want to say also, we will be going to the chat board. See, a bunch of people have already on YouTube. They're giving their thoughts. We'll get to that. We'll make this very viewer intensive. So go there, add a comment, smash the like button. Kurt, Miami Heat up somehow. 3-1 on Giannis Antetokounmpo, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, Brooke Lopez, the #1 seeded in all the playoffs. Milwaukee Bucks didn't see this coming. Want to throw this out to you. Want to throw this out to our listeners here on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. And I want you to be honest here. And listeners, I want you to be honest. Kurt, if you could bet your family's entire savings, either you have everything, double or nothing, on the Miami Heat winning this series, and I'm giving you a 3-1 lead in the equation, do you think it is a given that the Miami Heat win the series, that they should be favored in the series? And the reason I ask this is the math. The Miami Heat are favored by 11 to 11. I wish they were. The Bucks are favored by 11 to 11.5 points tonight. Wow. I would assume going back to Miami for Game 6, if there is one on Friday, the Bucks will be favored again. Obviously, the Heat will get the home court. Line might be down 3, 4, 5. They'll still be favored. I think we both agree if you get to a Game 7 in Milwaukee, where the Bucks have won 2 in a row, back on their home court, looking to advance, they'll probably be a prohibitive favorite. There's all these statistics out there. Home teams in Game 7 of NBA playoffs have won something like 90% of their games. So Kurt Helin, honestly, because I know you do this a lot at Pro Basketball Talk, would you bet the farm? And I bet you in any other situation with the team up 3-1, even like the Lakers, you would bet the farm. Would you bet the farm on the Miami Heat definitively winning this series?
Yeah, I still think that they're going to win. I still think I would bet. If you make me choose one of them, I will check it. Now, if I can bet my cats, I will put them on the Bucks because I don't care what happens. But if it's like the house and the family, I still think the Heat. You're right about this, but you don't want to get to a Game 7, right? Like on top of being on them having 1-2 in a row and having momentum and being home. 7s are random. 7s are weird one-off games like an NCAA tournament. And those are the games where Pat Connaughton or Gabe Vincent or Caleb Martin, somebody random has a brilliant game and just wins, like handles the pressure and wins it. And you just don't want to deal with that because it's too weird. I think you've got to win one of the next 2 and probably 6 at home. I think that's the one you're geared up for. I don't trust this. Part of the reason I'll do it is after watching them is great. And I don't want to take anything away from Jimmy and his otherworldly performance the other night. I don't know about these Bucks, man. I don't think they're quite as good as I thought they were.
Well, but here's the question. I want to go sort of piece by piece with you. And Heat fans, I'm not being negative. I'm just saying there is the possibilities. The Bucks are favored by 11 to 11.5 points tonight, Kurt. Do you find that line reasonable, appreciating this situation?
I think it's high. I think it's hard to play against the Heat. I don't think that they match up well with them. To me, that number seems like the Heat are going to make them work for it, even if the Bucks end up winning. I just think it's that. I think that number's too high.
Well, let me ask you this though: Do you feel the Bucks should be favored tonight?
Yeah, I think that. Okay. Here's why. The other thing, and we saw it last night in Toronto, in Atlanta. Desperation. You feel you're going to have to beat a desperate team one night to get there. And the Bucks will be desperate the way the Hawks were desperate. Frankly, the way the Timberwolves were desperate and almost pulled off a win. Clippers didn't have the people to do it, and they even led for part of the first half. It's just a different level. You're going to get the very best of the Bucks tonight.
Okay, so let's say the Bucks win tonight, folks. I'm not saying I want the Bucks to win. I'm not predicting the Bucks to win, but I'm saying let's say the Bucks win tonight because they're favored by 11. They may not cover it. They win. You're a bookmaker because that's where the money is these days. So You're setting up a line for DraftKings or someone. Milwaukee Bucks come back to Miami down 3-2 in the series. Where would you roughly see the line being in that game Friday night at the Kaseya Center?
My guess would be like Bucks 3.5, something like that.
So again,
I think they'd be favored.
You're seeing the Bucks being favored again, as they have through every game in this series, as they were even Monday in Game 4. So the point I'm trying to make is I think it's sort of a weird dynamic. The Heat are favored now nominally to win the series, but the Bucks are going to be favored every game remaining series. Throws it awful little in the series. And I disappeared, and I think I'm back now. There's one key in the series, and that is this. Giannis Antetokounmpo has to guard Jimmy Butler every single possession going forward. I don't understand why he didn't. I understand Drew Holiday is a great perimeter defender. I understand that if you put Giannis on Jimmy, you're putting someone else on Bam, who's not been, like Big O told us on the Crosstalk, on the Big O show, all that great anyway. Doesn't Giannis have to guard Jimmy? Don't you have to just put best on best and get that length on Jimmy? Or am I missing something? Or is it because of the injury? Or is it because of the time off? Or is it to keep him out of foul trouble? Or is it to save his legs? Kurt, if we're still doing inside the paint, redrecover.com, inside the Bucks, that's what I'm sort of championing right now. Your thoughts on that?
I think they have to, because he just destroyed Middleton last game. They tried that for a while. Middleton fouled out, but was in foul trouble. Just can't handle him. I thought Drew, I'm like, all right, here comes Drew. Drew is an all defensive level player, and Jimmy just worked him. Butler was on such a roll, playing with such physicality, that I think they have to go to Giannis. I think the reason they didn't, outside of I don't think he moved that well laterally. I thought the injury impacted him.
Interesting.
And I don't want to also, by the way, I don't want to take too much away from him. Have you ever seen Giannis Antetokounmpo pass that well? He was a great passer in Game
13
4.
assists. He was their facilitator. He showed his overall greatness. He really did very little wrong in that game. It's interesting. Big O was talking in our crosstalk, and you had mentioned also about getting Jimmy Butler some help. It's almost the point they need to get Giannis Antetokounmpo some help. Yeah. Certainly, Brook Lopez was awesome with what he did. And yet, if I'm the Heat, and I'm saying, I know you're getting choked up because the Heat are leading the series. No. If I go get yourself a drink there, you got the coffee? We okay there?
No, I'll go get it at the break. We'll be all right.
Okay, so I'll try to carry it through. Well, and since I'll be mean-spirited, I'll take this segment long. So if you're the Heat, though, and Brook Lopez is scoring like that, aren't you almost fine with that to the degree that Giannis isn't shooting, Chris Middleton isn't shooting, Drew Holiday isn't shooting, and you know where Brook Lopez will be versus chasing and switching on the other guys?
Remember when Brook entered the game, he was the better of the offensive centers. He wasn't considered this defensive force. He didn't have this three-point shot and some of the stuff he added, but he was a gifted offensive center, and I think they leaned on that a little in this one. And they should again. I think defensively, though, you've got to put Giannis on Jimmy, and then you've got to bring Brook up to the level of screen. The drop coverage thing, Jimmy just ate it up. You can't play him back. You've got to start treating them as get the ball out of Jimmy's hands. I dare anyone else to beat.
Yes,
that's how I would be playing it now. I would be Deer and Fox at the end of that game, where they're like, Harrison Barnes can have the open three, which would have been poetic. Harrison Barnes can have the open three. Anybody but Fox. There had to be an anybody but Jimmy moment, and I didn't get that from the Bucks, which is
and you know what, Kurt, and that's a good point. I want to interrupt you here for this because I want to get your thoughts and I want to get our listeners' thoughts on this. So they run the double at Jimmy. Drew Holiday's on him. They come off the ball with Grayson Allen, with Chris Middleton, with someone else. We've seen that. The Heat's done that with Trae Young all the time. They double.
Yeah.
If you're the Miami Heat, and you know Jimmy Butler's a very willing passer also, like you mentioned Giannis in Game 4, who should be, and listeners, please chime in this also, who should be or who needs to be the guy who steps up? So, Kurt, I'll throw it in your court first. Jimmy's being doubled, being forced out to the wing. Someone is waving their hands and they're wide open. Who has to or should be the player who takes over from there?
it kind of depends on the guy they leave open, I guess. But that's like, this is a Caleb Martin game, Max Strus game. I don't think they're going to leave Bam that way. And I think he gets into the paint where they've already got length. Like they're just, that's a long team. So I'm not sure that he gets the freedom, but that means Kyle Lowry's been good this series. Like somebody is going to have to drive, step up, hit the mid-range, and have, like I said, have a 28-point night from somewhere that we didn't expect. And they have a lot of guys, I think, capable. Just somebody's got to do it.
I'm going to say wrong, even though I think you're right for this reason. I don't think they have a specific player who is capable of doing it. I don't think on this Miami Heat roster, against this Milwaukee Bucks defense, the Heat have another 30-point game on their roster. I don't see it. What they do have, and have had in the playoffs, and have had since the All-Star break, like Eric Spoelstra pointed out, was three-point shooting. So I think it's going to have to be the three-point shooting. So I'm going to throw another name into the group you threw in there, and that's Kevin Love also. I think it's going to be pass, swing, swing. And it's going to wind up in the hands of Kevin Love, in the hands of Duncan Robinson, in the hands of Max Strus, in the hands of Kyle Lowry, in the hands of Caleb Martin. And collectively, those guys have to hit, you know what, I'm going to do it this way, have to probably hit at least 15 threes. Because if that'll give you 45 non-Jimmy Butler points, and he still can give you his 20 or 25, then you could split the 2-point baskets among the other players. So I think that's where it has to go. Want to get to the chat board here. Want to try to get to as many of these as we can before our first break. So we're going to go a little long here, Sean. Sorry, Kurt. And then we'll come back and break down the series a little more and look around the playoffs. Two Extreme points out. Anyone catch Myers Leonard cheering for the Heat on the Bucks bench where they made a three-pointer? I want to clarify that. Myers Leonard did rise from the bench and put up 2 sets of 3 fingers when the Heat hit a 3, and everyone's like, Myers forgot what team he was on. He was going to go to the Heat locker room. He later said, and he posted this just today on Twitter, he was putting up 33, that there were 33 seconds left on the shot clock, and that he thought his team can get a 2-for-1. So I'd say the fact that Myers went onto Twitter and did that right now, I think that gives you a sense that maybe he's not BSing you, and there is a little bit more to that. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. And just when we get to the chat board here also, bunch of thoughts here from the Heat, wondering if this is going 7. Kurt Helin, if I was to ask you, how many games do you see Miami Heat, Milwaukee Bucks going, heading into the Heat's 3-1 lead in Game 5? Your answer would be?
6.
You know what? Here's something.
I think they get him at home.
And that's something that we were talking about in the press room the other day. You don't kick a playoff game to the side. You don't kick it off the road. I get all that. Kurt, could there be something to be said about the Miami Heat saving themselves for Game 6 if it gets a little sideways tonight? Or can you, 1, not afford to play with fire in the playoffs, and 2, hell, you came back from a 12-point deficit midway through the fourth quarter the other day anyway, so you can't play sort of tempt the fates like that.
And it's 2 days later, right? It's a travel and every other day now, right?
Now it's just every other day, basically how it'll be the remainder of the playoffs. No more of these infernal 2-day breaks, correct?
Yeah, so I'm still, with some players, might have been cautious, like a Kevin Love or somebody. Jimmy's conditioning, which I think sometimes gets overlooked, his ability in that game to have to, like you said, he was guarding Giannis. He was guarding whoever they needed him to guard and then putting up those points. His ability to bounce back in 2 days, I'm going to trust. I maybe not going to lean on him. There comes a point where I pull away, but it's also, like you said, it's the playoffs. If we're down 12 with 6 minutes left, I'm not quitting. I'm not quitting until there's a minute or 2 left and we're down 12, and then maybe I'll think about it. But Brandon, at this point, this is what you do it for.
No, I agree with that. Brandon checks in and said, I would take the points as soon as possible. Kurt, is 11 points a little bit gaudy here? Or is the feeling is if their Bucks are going to have a statement game, they've got to make it a statement game just like they did in Game 2 of this series when they blew the Heat off the floor? If you had a choice, you take it or give in the points?
I'd take the points. I don't think that – I think the Heat are just too tough to play against. But I think that there's a sense around at least some bettors, and I don't know if it's the smart ones, but I don't know if it's the smartest bettors, but look, this is a more talented Bucks team that's finally going to snap out of it, and they're going to come tonight. Like, we're finally going to see the best of the Bucks tonight type of attitude. Where I don't, like I said, I think we've seen is the best of the Bucks, and they're not. I was about to say they're not the best team in the East. They can roll through anybody, but then I watched the Celtics last night, so I don't know.
So now you just don't know. Maybe it's the Sixers. I guess we're going to find that lesson. Going to touch on this, but get to the NBA around the league a little later. Eric says Lakers about to beat Memphis 4-1. Kurt, you buying that real quickly?
I think it's 6 at home. I think Memphis rises up at home. That series has been relatively close, but, man, they miss Steven Adams. They just don't have him inside.
I agree with that. Griffin chimes in here and says the Heat are closing out the series tonight. All of a sudden, everyone's on the Heat bandwagon. Two Extreme says, Ira Kurt, 3 words to describe the season. Jimmy effing Butler. And he actually typed in effing, so thank you for keeping the profanity to the minimum. We'll leave that to the Big O. Travis chimes in, why do I feel like this series is still going 7? So again, Kurt, if you were to pick the number of the games in the series, and obviously anything short of 7, the Heat win, which of the outcomes this series goes? 5 games, 6 games, or 7 games? Which number are you going with?
6. I think
with 6.
When your road team's upsetting the apple cart, or pulling the upset, that's usually a 6 game. You're more likely at home. You're more likely to get what you talked about. By the way, role players are the guys who make a difference at home. That's the game where Caleb, Kevin, on down the line are just more. Duncan's knocking down threes in front of the home crowd is more likely than in a hostile Bucks arena.
I agree. Daniel chimes in here. Don't worry about Bam. He'll be a Sixer soon. That, of course, raises the other question. Kurt Helin, if the Philadelphia 76ers don't get out of the second round and lose, I assume they'll be playing the Boston Celtics. Could you see Joel Embiid either forcing his way out, wanting his way out, or the Sixers perhaps blowing it up, having never made it out of the Eastern Conference semifinals with Joel Embiid on their roster?
Yeah, it's possible, but it starts with this. You didn't mention the big guy. If James Harden goes to Houston, and we've talked about this, there's more than smoke there. If James Harden leaves, you might see Embiid just try to pull the ripcord. And if he leaves Miami, New York, it gets really interesting. Yeah.
Right. I'm just going to go through these, not ask for answers. Someone's saying, don't worry about the Heat. They will beat New York in 5 or 6. We will get to New York, Cleveland. That winner of that series played the winner of the Heat series. JC says Big O is right when he's talking about Bam Adebayo. Well, it's Big O's show. So Kurt and I always say Big O is always right. Some of our listeners chiming in on the players who step forward for the Heat, a vote for Kyle Lowry. Travis has a vote for Gabe Vincent. And we've seen Gabe have these sort of one-off games when he's taking control a little bit more. Daniel says Bam has to be the guy. C. Dollar says Heat in 5. Terry says, I think this is going to be a Duncan Robinson game. I think that's reasonable. He is leading the NBA in three-point shooting during these playoffs. So certainly that's a possibility. Brandon says Jimmy's not letting the series go to 6. Obviously, the extra time off will help because the next round will not begin at least till Sunday. Players do play at this time of year to get extra time off. The Celtics couldn't get it for themselves. The Sixers were loving that the Boston series is going on. Pep0222 says, any chance Tyler can get back earlier? No NBA Finals, but don't worry. When the Heat get there, he should be absolutely fine. Pep also says, I was expecting a little more from Cody Zeller off the bench. Not so sure that he's going to be your swing guy. But what I like is people are engaged with the Heat again at the end of April. Didn't see this coming. But what I do see coming is a possible Heat second-round playoff series. Don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but such a series would start before we do our next RedRecover.com Inside the Paint next week. So after the break, I'm going to ask Kurt Helin, how far can these Heat go? Is it just Milwaukee? Is it on to New York or Cleveland? Are there bigger and better things? Or are we getting way the hell too far ahead of ourselves? All that and more coming up after this break on RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. And we're back on our weekly, usually 9 a.m. Wednesday, RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, here in the same hotel room as last Wednesday in Milwaukee. That didn't turn out too well for the Heat. He's Kurt Helin from Pro Basketball Talk and NBCSports.com, who I hope during the break was well hydrated and not in choke mode, which people now are worried the Heat might turn into. But that's another story for another day. Kurt, a lot going on about the Heat. If you missed anything we talked about, who has to step up for the Heat in their next 1, 2, or 3 games in the series, that was in our first segment. You can find that anywhere. You can just go for the Big O Show podcast. But I want to ask you now, sort of looking around the rest of the playoffs and the East, and how it's not all that we thought it was. Last night, Boston Celtics are cruising. Double-digit lead first quarter, double-digit lead second quarter, double-digit lead third quarter, double-digit lead fourth quarter. And then Marcus Smart makes some of the most boneheaded plays I can recall at the end of a game, whether it's turnovers, whether it's a nonsensical foul on Trae Young at midcourt to stop the clock and get him to the line. So it's interesting, Kurt. We spoke in our first segment how the Bucks maybe aren't all that we thought they were. Even with their great close to the season, #1 seed of all teams in the NBA playoffs. The Boston Celtics and the warts they showed against an Atlanta team lacking DeJounte Murray, now having to go give Philadelphia extra rest. That series doesn't begin till Monday. Whoever wins Hawks, Celtics, plays the 76ers. Are the Celtics not who we thought they were either, Kurt Helin?
It's possible, yeah. I'm beginning to wonder. It just that's not the first time they've done it this postseason, or this season. But that was not the Hawks. With all due respect to Trae Young, that was not the Hawks beating them. That was a collapse from Boston. That was, like you said, missed defensive assignments, turnovers, sloppy play that opened the door that this team shouldn't do if this team is who it says it is. So I'm with you, by the way. I thought we went into this like, oh, the West is wide open, but top 3 teams in the East are really solid. And no, it's wide open.
Okay, but talking about top 3 teams in the East, what Philadelphia did was pretty surgical, especially without, I'm glad you got a drink there, without Joel Embiid in Game 4 against Brooklyn. Now, Brooklyn, of course, had the problem of this. They were a team that began, or let's go back a year and a half or so, they were a team that had nothing but superstars. They had James Harden, then he was dealt. They had Kyrie Irving, then he was dealt. They had Kevin Durant, then he was dealt. They didn't have a leading man. In the playoffs, as Jimmy and Devin Booker, as we've seen, you have to have a leading man, even in Austin Reeves. You have to have someone like that. So when you look at the situation right now with Philadelphia and where they stand, do we know that Philadelphia is ready for what's next? Do we know that Philadelphia is better than the team that, again, like I said during our first segment, Joel Embiid has never gotten out of the Eastern Conference semifinals? Or do we have the same who are you Philadelphia 76ers questions we did because they played such an innocuous first-round opponent in the Brooklyn Nets?
See, I still think the questions are there because I don't think the Nets could test their weaknesses, which are specifically backcourt defense, right? Harden and Maxey are not good defenders. If you can attack them, you can get, they got, but like you said, they got, hey, Tobias Harris had a good series.
He did. He looked very
good enough. Like before the injury was good enough. Like they were everything they needed to be in that round. They answered those questions. They closed it out in 4. Like, I don't know what more you could ask of them. I think the questions still hang. I don't think they're a good matchup with Boston at all. But
okay,
like I said, but Boston's at least opened the door to questioning them. Now maybe Boston comes out and just smokes Philly, but the lack of mental toughness by Boston disturbed me a little bit.
All right, we're going to do a little bracketology because the NBA is a bracket. There's no reseeding. So Kurt and I both are going to put on our Joe Lunardi hair right now, Joe Lunardi hair. So we'll get a nice piece, pull it nice and tight so people can see us with that look, get the comb over going. In bracketology in the NBA, the Miami Heat Milwaukee Bucks series winner is bracketed to face the winner of the New York Knicks Cleveland Cavaliers series.
Right.
Want to look at that series first in just general in that series itself. Game 5 of that series is tonight in Cleveland. When you look at that series, has it played out the way you thought it would be with New York leading 3-1 going into Cleveland tonight?
No. And I thought it was a pretty even series, but 2 things. I thought Donovan Mitchell would be the best player in that series. He's not. He's not even the best player on his own team, frankly. It's been Jalen Brunson, and I guess my fault because this is 2 years in a row now. Brunson has completely outplayed Devin Booker head-to-head in a series. I mean, I did it last year. I didn't think
Donovan Mitchell. I mean, outplayed Donovan. Mitchell.
Did I say Devin Booker? I meant Donovan Mitchell. Yeah.
Right.
And then I thought, well, the other advantage Cleveland has is that front line with Mobley and with Jared Allen. Mitchell Robinson has flat out outplayed them. And the other part of this, which is, I think if I were a Cavaliers fan, it would be most disturbing, and is what's excited the Knicks fans. They're just playing harder every game. They are working harder. They are working. It's the playoffs, and I think maybe tonight we finally see some desperation from Cleveland. But New York has played like that all series, Ira. They've just wanted this thing more.
I mean, they've been playing as the embodiment. I should be better at English, but they paid me, so I just do that. They've been playing as the embodiment of their coach, Tom Thibodeau. Yeah, exactly. So they've been playing like a Thibodeau team. Now, Thibodeau teams can wear out, can burn out and all that, but you could see him in them and what they're getting out of it and how they're pushing without the greatest Julius Randle series in the first place and winding up this place. And your point about Donovan Mitchell is cogent because when they showed the list of all-time playoff scorers with Michael Jordan, the all-time leader, and only 3 players with more points than Jimmy Butler's 56, Donovan Mitchell was one of them. Donovan Mitchell during the playoffs in Utah had been such a standout. That's the reason they traded for him. That's the reason they got him for moments like this. And he sort of collapsed. So I haven't checked the latest line on that series. But tonight in game 5 of that series in Cleveland, how do you see tonight going, Knicks versus Cavaliers?
I think it's probably close, but I think we finally get the desperate Cavaliers we kind of hope. This is when they come out. I think at home they probably eke out a win, but I don't think they can pull it together in the Garden when, again, the role players suddenly get comfortable and quickly plays better than he did the other night and on down the line.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting because if you're feeding into that series, you want that series to go as many games as possible. So when you look at a series like that, you're saying to yourselves, hey, you keep playing, we'll get the rest again. It looks like the Eastern Conference semifinal from this half of our Joe Lunardi bracket between the Knicks and the Cavaliers winner and the Heat and the Bucks winner will start Sunday unless either of the series goes 7. So a Heat perfect world would be winning tonight in Milwaukee, Jimmy Buckets leading on the line, and having at least till Sunday and maybe even till next Tuesday to go back out, get his IV, be ready to play. Jimmy's been showing that in his social media. I would be shocked, not shocked, that's a little strong. I would be surprised if Cleveland doesn't put together a better effort on its home court. Yeah. But I did say going to these playoffs, Kurt, that I did think that if Cleveland could wind up as just one of these sort of glad to be there kind of teams, like, oh, we made the playoffs. We were eliminated last year in the play-in, so now we're good to go. So I think it will be interesting to see how that plays out with the Cavaliers and whether they have the motivation. So I guess I ask you the question about the Boston Celtics. And I ask you this question about the Philadelphia 76ers. Are the New York Knicks real enough? By the way, I love how the sun is hitting me right now. I'm like 50-50 man here. Are the Knicks real as a playoff contender? Or, like we spoke about the Sixers, are they just getting the right matchup?
I think they got a good matchup for them. I don't believe in their depth to be – I just don't think of them as contenders. But they also – at this point in the playoffs, sometimes it's less about how, again, he sort of proved this wrong the other night. Most of the time, it's not about how great your star is. Mm-hmm. It's about where can I attack your weaknesses, especially in the second round and beyond. That's one place I think the Knicks are pretty good. That's a deep team. There's not a lot of like, oh, dude, we can just target this guy moments. So it's going to be interesting to see. As the Knicks come into the light, and we'll see if they can. They're a good team, but and by the way, I'll tell you that the people in New York and the fans in New York are convinced they're rolling through the Heat. They think they're in the conference finals already. They are mentally there. They're already lining up Boston. Like, I'm surprised there weren't "we want Boston" chants after this.
And you know, but you know funny. What, Kurt? I don't begrudge him for this because if you're feeding into the number 1-8 series and all of a sudden you're not going to play number 1, any team would have that reaction. Yeah. It's a natural reaction that you don't have to play the best of the best. So I do get that, and I do get where they're coming from. Again, Sean, we're running a little long on this segment, but hell, I just want to see if I can get Kurt choked up again. So I don't want to take this too far, because I know Heat Nation will sort of get on me that, hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves, and I get that. But we won't be on our RedRecover.com Inside the Paint show until the next round starts when we play again next Wednesday. So my question to you is, all things being equal, forget about how the series score is right now in the series. Forget about the Cavaliers score. Just looking at the matchups. If you're the Miami Heat and you could dip in there and pick out your opponent of choice, if you were Eric Spoelstra, Pat Riley, Andy Ellisberg, and you had a choice, which team do you think they would prefer, Eric Spoelstra would prefer to play in the second round? The Cleveland Cavaliers or the New York Knicks?
I think it's wow. That's a good question. I mean, because the on paper, I would rather face the Knicks, but the way the Cavaliers have played, I'd probably rather face them. They just a better version of the Cavs is dangerous because what we said about Donovan Mitchell and their size up front forces it. That's a tough matchup for Bam if you've got to go up against Mobley and Jared Allen up front, and you've got to put some size next. You're going to get a lot of Cody Zeller in that series. So I think on paper the Knicks are better, but the Knicks play hard, and I'm now rooting for that series just because I want the full-on '90s throwback, man.
Yes, I was going to say that. I mean, there'd just be so much to that, so much history. They did play once since the Hardaway Morning years. That was during the Big Three era. If you remember, Carmelo Anthony was with the Knicks. The Heat won that series 4-1. What people might not remember, when the series was 3-0, the Knicks won at the Garden, and they dropped confetti. And they dropped streamers as if they had won anything. The Heat came home. They closed it out in 5. And Heat players to this day still are like, what the F? You won a game. You're down 3-1. And the Knicks celebrated that. The Knicks knew at that point with Carmelo they weren't good enough against the Big Three Heat. This would be a lot different. It's going to be very interesting. If the Cavaliers win tonight, if the Lakers don't close it out, and if the Bucks stay alive, ESPN is going to have to break 3 games into 2 TV slots because they also have the the NFL draft. And there is a chance after Heat Bucks being on NBA TV tonight, it would be on ESPN News on Friday. So you talk about a lack of respect of where you've got to go because of the draft, because it's an ABC, ESPN property. They're sort of all over the place. So I think there's a lot of people in the NBA that would like to see at least one of these 3 series ends tonight. And like Kurt said in our previous segment, he thinks the Grizzlies can hold off the Lakers. That goes back to a Friday game. You're saying you think the Cavaliers can beat the Knicks. That goes on to a Friday game. The consensus, an 11-point favorite, is the Bucks will beat the Heat. That goes to a Friday game 6. So your scheduling could be a little bit interesting. I'm wondering if they're going to run the big odds box like they do on ESPN News even during that game. So I think the NBA is sort of a little bit of a pickle now. As it is, Atlanta winning yesterday in Boston. Janet Jackson had to move back one day. I didn't even know she was still doing concerts. So State Farm
That's Miss Jackson if you're nasty. Yes.
Okay, well, again, look at you, like old school there. I'll leave it there. When we come back, we're going to take another look around the NBA in its totality. We're going to look a little more deeper dive in tonight's game 5 of Heat Milwaukee Bucks. And we will try to get back to your chat board as well. But for now, we're going to take a break and be back after this on RedRecover.com, Inside the Paint. And welcome back for our third and final segment of RedRecover.com, Inside the Paint. I'm Ira Winderman from the South Florida Sun-Sentinel here in Milwaukee for Game 5 of Heat Bucks. He's Kurt Helin, dealing with his wounds after the Clippers were eliminated yesterday. He's out in L.A. with NBCSports.com, pro basketball talk. A lot to get to. In our final segment, if you missed either of our first 2 segments, go to anywhere you can find the Big O Show podcast. You can catch up on all of that. Going around the league real quick, we pretty much got into the East and took care of all of that. Boston, Atlanta, going Game 6 in Atlanta on Thursday night. How does that series end, Kurt Helin?
I think Boston closes it out in 6. I think that they stop playing with their food. By the way, I got that one right, unlike Doc Rivers. It's playing with your food, Doc.
There you go. Correcting Doc, he'll have another chance when he has another 4, 5, or 6 games in the next round. The Heat Bucks series, you told us in our first segment, you think Heat in 6 is the outcome here.
Yeah, I think so. I think back home, I think they put one together in front of the crowd.
Knicks Cavaliers, we mentioned that in our previous segment for possible Heat matchups. Where do you see that series ending?
I'll say Knicks in 6. I don't think these Cavs can win 3 straight.
No, I think that would be a bit of a chore. Although I see the Knicks, something in the Knicks, I could see them losing 3 straight. I would almost put it that way. We go out to the Western Conference. What Phoenix did to the Clippers, in light of who the Clippers weren't, pretty much what you figured. Any surprise in that series?
Not really. In fact, honestly, after seeing the Suns in person twice last week, I'm way less convinced they're a contender. I'm way less scared of them after seeing them in person.
Why is that?
As great as Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are, the defense isn't as sharp. The depth isn't there. Monty Williams is still trying to figure out how to make it work behind those two. They need a fifth Beatle. They need depth they can trust, and I don't think they have it yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. Denver, Minnesota, the series that no one watched. I think there was nominal interest there. Your thoughts on how that played out?
Yeah, the Nuggets might be the best team in the West. They're healthy, and they actually won the non-Jokic minutes in that series. If they win the non-Jokic minutes, they're very tough to beat.
You know, I would look at that, and I guess I'll bring those two half of the brackets together in our Lenardi segment here. Denver against Phoenix in the next round. How do you see that shaking out?
Ooh, that's a 7-game. That's a 7 games. I'm probably going to pick Denver, honestly. I'm a little higher on them than Phoenix right now, but I picked against Kevin Durant, which just suddenly feels stupid. So we'll see.
Reasonable. Lakers, Memphis, you told us in one of our previous segments you think Memphis wins today, forces the Lakers back for a game 6. How do you see that series ending?
Yeah, I think the Lakers ended in 6. I think they're the team that, because they rely so much on getting the Austin Reeves of the world to step up, I think the comfort level at home will help them there.
And then the greatest first-round playoff series in the history of the NBA, Kings, Golden State Warriors. I mean, it really has become epic. How do you see that one?
I honestly, this is the most even series, too. I mean, both teams could be. If Harrison Barnes hits that 3, the Kings are up 3-1. But if Andrew Wiggins hits that 3 in game 1, it's a 3-1 Warrior series. I think this is a toss-up series. I'll still lean to the – well, I say Kings in 7, but that's a bet on De'Aaron Fox being able to pull an inner Kobe Bryant and play through this fractured finger thing. We'll see how he comes out. Sabonis hasn't done anything this series with Green and Looney on him. They're either going to need a lot more him or De'Aaron Fox is, like I said, pull a Kobe on this thing and play through that broken finger and still.
I see Warriors in 7 just because I think Golden State and who they are in 7 and Sacramento and who they aren't yet, even at home when there will be cowbells, I still think that they'll have a little bit more at the end. The next series, either way, could be epic also. If you're correct, then it's going to be the Lakers. Whether it's Lakers-Kings, shades of – you talked about Heat-Knicks as the throwback, but, we're talking about the Vlade Divac, Chris Webber, Mike Bibby Kings against those great Laker teams. You would have that. And certainly, if it's Lakers-Warriors, I don't care that it's Western time zone. They would have to get that prime time nationally because that would be epic. So to move forward out of that bracket, if we're doing our bracketology, out of that quadrant – out of the quadrant with Lakers, Grizzlies, Kings, and Warriors, if you just had to predict that as its own tournament, which one team of those 4 advances out of that quadrant?
I think it's whoever comes out of Kings, Warriors. I think the Kings run the Lakers into the ground playing every other day. They played fast this series. Their depth is better. The Lakers have looked a little – the Lakers benefited from the same thing that the Heat got in this series with those long breaks in the first round. And now they're able to close it out. And I don't think the Warriors are a good matchup for the Lakers, but that would be a more interesting series. That would be a chess match of a series and then probably 7 games either way, right? That would be fascinating.
That would, it's interesting because you would think this series with Kevin Durant would be the epic semifinal in the West, but I think it's going to be the other one. And I think that's a really, from the moment it started, I think that's a fascinating quadrant. Want to get back to the chat board while we still have a chance here. We did in our first segment, so we answered as many questions as we could then. We're going to try to do that here as we look forward toward the end of our show. We'll hit the Big O show at the top of the hour. Travis chimes in. He says Gabe Vincent's the guy who's going to step up. Could you see a Gabe Vincent moment tonight against Milwaukee here at Fiserv Forum in Game 5?
Yeah, in 5 or 6. He is one of those guys who's done it before, and he's the guy, maybe more than the others we talked about. You know, pass to get that shot. If they close out, he's the guy who can put it on the floor and get to the rack and get fouled. He's a little more of a creator than Martin or Duncan Robinson or Kevin Love. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, Daniel chimes in and he says Kyle Lowry needs to be more of a scorer. Can 37-year-old Kyle Lowry be more of a scorer against this Bucks defense, Kurt Helin?
For one night, yeah. Like, again, I think he's capable of having that one game where he actually had what did he have, 20 in the first game? Am I remembering that right?
He's played well in the series. He had that big game against Atlanta that he lost, but certainly you could wind up there that, you can have – and again, this is another case. Kyle Lowry at 37 knows you win tonight, he gets 4 days off at least before the next round. For the Heat's older players, and there are a lot of them, when counting Jimmy and counting Kyle and counting Kevin Love, that these guys could use the extra time, so they're almost playing for additional time off tonight. Terry says, I think this is going to be a Duncan Robinson game. See, my sense, Kurt Helin, is Duncan has already had his Duncan Robinson games. He'll get a little bit more attention. I also think that right now the Bucks are looking at, hey, you want to put Duncan on the floor, we will play him off the floor on the defensive end. I don't think the Bucks have necessarily tried to take advantage of matchups versus playing their system to this point. I think that changes now. I think if they get the Duncan Robinson or Max Strus matchup, I think they're more likely to attack it. I think that's what happens in scouting reports as you play the same opponent and series go on. Your thoughts? Can the Heat survive Duncan Robinson defensively, Kurt Helin?
Not for extended minutes. By the way, that's also very Bud, isn't it? Bud doesn't flex. Like, he doesn't, he's not flexible quickly enough sometimes. And he's like, no, we're going to win playing our way. Oh, all right, crap. All right, let's try this now. And that got him in trouble in the past, but I think you're right. In this series, I think this is where they really hunt matchups tonight.
Yeah, and again, and you're thinking about Coach Bud is it, and I do wonder, I don't think he's going to be in trouble. He's the #1 seeded team. Yeah. He's gotten them a championship, but yeah, there's a bunch of coaches in this league who are not necessarily known as playoff coaches. That was a Nate McMillan bugaboo. He wound up out in Atlanta. That's been a Doc Rivers thing at so many stops, particularly when he was with the Clippers. So it will be interesting to see those coaches. Brandon says Jimmy's not letting this series get to 6. Could single-minded Jimmy Butler be enough again? Or let's be honest, Kurt Helin, for all those guys we've seen at the top of the NBA playoff scoring list, it's not like they did it 2 or 3 games in a row.
I don't think it's likely, but I'm not counting Jimmy out of putting up another monster night. I think he's got to get more help tonight, though. I don't think he can 56-point carry the team the same way. But can he get to 40 and somebody else gives you the other 20 you need? Yeah.
And that'll be another interesting part tonight. Robbie says, because we mentioned Joel Embiid never getting out of the Eastern Conference semifinals, if it happens again. Kurt mentioned the possibility of James Harden leaving as a free agent for the Houston Rockets. So Robbie goes, I know it's early, but what would a Joel trade package look like? Obviously, we start with Bam Adebayo because you'd want to get another big man back. Do you think there would be anything holding the Heat back from trading Bam Adebayo in a package that might also include draft picks and Tyler Hero to the Sixers? Or do you think if Joel Embiid's available, the Heat and Pat Riley would go all in?
All in. I think Joel's about to be your MVP, has been one of the 3 best players in the league, or 5 best players, or however you want to break that down, for the last 4 years, probably. I think to go get – you bring him in and put him next to Jimmy, and you are a title contender tomorrow. And so you go do it.
Anyone in the East can agree with that. I like this because we're doing our little mini brackets here. And Daniel says, Ira, I want you and Kurt to go further. Toughest matchup for the Heat, Celtics or Sixers. So we're already in the conference finals. I would say Celtics just based on history, based on Doc Rivers coaching in the playoffs, based on James Harden shrinking a little bit. Look, folks, I don't want to be the guy who's jinxing the Heat. And next week on RedRecover.com, Inside the Paint, Kurt and I are talking about a Heat season wrap-up. But, hey, we also respect the chat board here. Daniel asks, so Kurt, you answer. Tougher matchup in the Eastern Conference Finals for the Heat if they get there. I'm not saying they are. Celtics or Sixers?
I still think it's the Celtics. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Sometimes in the playoffs, it's not about the best player. It's about lack of weaknesses. That's Boston's greatest strength. They can roll 5 good defenders out. They can get offense from – Smart can play offense. Like their depth is a real problem the deeper they go.
And then I love how everyone has to take it to extremes, and this isn't from too extreme. Daniel chimes back in, says, any chance that he could land both Embiid and Lillard? Sure, why not just land an entire all-star team? Look, I think we have to be reasonable here. I think the number one attainable star-level talent for the Heat is Bradley Beal. I think with them changing their general managers and maybe general manager and Tommy Shepard and going in a different direction, they might be open to it. I think Tyler Hero can be a starting point in that deal. Now, you might say Bradley Beal at $50 million is too much, $500,000 a game for what he is. He might be on the decline. I get that. But you also have to look at gettable assets. I think other teams have more to offer the Portland Trailblazers for Damian Lillard than the Heat do. Kurt, just a matter of fact, take us through, because you do a lot of this at NBC Sports and ProBasketballTalk.com. What's the starting point for a Damian Lillard trade package should someone be interested?
Young players and pick, it's going to be – that's a more pick-based thing. Because if they're getting rid of Lillard, they're not looking to – Washington with Beal, because the way Ted Leonsis runs his teams, they're going to want to stay relevant. They're going to want to stay as possible as an 8 seed. Portland is willing to pull the ripcord. If they're trading him, then Jeremy Grant could be gone. Simons could be gone. Like, they are going to tear this thing down to the studs and bounce back up. So they will want picks more than, hey, Tyler Hero's nice, and whoever else you're going to throw in, they're going to want picks. And
I don't see the Heat having an avenue to get picks. Would you give up Bam Adebayo in a Damian Lillard trade, giving up a lot of age?
I don't know that I would, because I still think you've got to have somebody inside with it's different with Joel Embiid, because you bring back internal size. Like, I don't think you do that with, obviously you don't with Lillard. And Lillard's not on the front end of his curve, man. Like, this is trading. Right? I don't want to give up that. Yeah. I need Bam to stay and be the defensive force inside, because Lillard is he's not the best defensive guard in the league.
And I want to wrap up today's show, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone else here in the chat board. Hey, chime in next week when we'll be in New York or Cleveland, maybe, and we'll take it from there. Kurt Helin, for the Miami Heat to beat the Milwaukee Bucks and close out the series in Game 5 tonight, they have to do what?
Hit their threes. I think you hit it on the head earlier. If they're going to win one of these games, it's going to be partially because – we talked about who was going to step up, but they're going to have to rain threes on this team for a night.
What can the Milwaukee Bucks do in Game 5 to sort of reestablish themselves as favorites? In other words, and Bud said this also after the game, you can't win 3 games tonight. The best the Bucks can do is close within 3-2 in the series. But what element, if it happens tonight in Heat Bucks here in Milwaukee at Fiserv Forum, if you see this from the Bucks, would you start shaking your head and going, the Bucks have this figured out?
Giannis on Jimmy, slowing Jimmy down, way down, and forcing. And if they can single cover Jimmy and not, or you're still gonna have to bring some help. But if you can largely single cover Jimmy and keep him relatively in check, then that's a real problem for the Heat.
Yeah, I think you hit both of those on the head. I think it has to be a 3-a-thon for the Heat. Not only dunking, it has to be Max, it has to be Gabe Vincent, it has to be Caleb Martin. There have to be at least 15 conversions and a high number of attempts to spread out that Bucks defense. And I agree. Giannis, as much as he did on offense with his triple-double in Game 4, he has to do just as much defensively and stay out of foul trouble against Jimmy Butler, which is no easy task. So we'll see that. So, hey, that's this week's RedRecover.com Inside the Paint. Next week, either our big annual Heat season wrap-up show, or else I'll be at a Residence Inn in Cleveland or some incredibly overpriced teeny tiny room in New York for the second round of the playoffs. But for now, the Rip Bam Adebayo-a-thon continues as the Big O Show rolls on.